Thank you, Gisèle, the front pages read this morning, her smile printed across each and every one. Her decision to speak out, to waive her anonymity, triggering a groundswell of emotion and introspection.
J'ai voulu que la société puisse se saisir des débats qui y sont tenus.
This mass rape trial, which closed a week before Christmas, is one that will be discussed in almost every home in France. Among those thanking her, President Macron. Your dignity and courage, he said, have inspired the world. After a grueling 3.5-month trial, Gisèle and her family, instead of retreating, are calling for others to join their fight.
Pour moi, il n'existe plus.
My father doesn't exist to me anymore, her son David said this morning, before telling men they should be joining the protest movement.
Messieurs,
men, you have a role in this, and it's time to react. I'm convinced this should be a compass, a guide for the education of our children, and for our sons in particular.
et en particulier de nos fils.
Campaigners have condemned words used by some of the abuser's lawyers, among them that Gisèle didn't cry enough, that she was a willing participant in a sex game. This defence lawyer called protesters hysterical and seemed to enjoy goading the crowds outside court. Dominique Pelicot's own lawyer was criticised for her choice of language outside the court yesterday.
Je disais au début des débats que Monsieur Pelicot n'était pas forcément le chef d'orchestre et les autres n'étaient pas les musiciens. Pour autant, je pense que par l'énoncé de ce verdict, la Cour a condamné le chef d'orchestre.
During the trial, some of the abusers argued that it wasn't rape because Dominique had given consent on Gisèle's behalf. One of their own wives said she felt responsible for having not slept with her husband and that had led him to abuse Gisèle. It was at this point that Gisèle intervened via her lawyer and said it's important for you to know that it is not your fault. There's no obligation for you to have sex with your husband. Her capacity to change the way that people talk and think about sexual violence has brought more than 100 protesters here today, lots of them all the way from Spain.
Visca, 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 la lucha feminista!
The trial has generated a fierce debate around consent, not least about France's refusal to adopt an EU directive that says sex without consent is rape. Instead, rape can only be committed by violence, coercion, threat, or surprise, with no clear mention of the need for a partner's consent. It's a loophole that complicates cases where women don't speak during an attack, and one some lawyers in this case tried to exploit. Dominique Pelicot was also found guilty of taking indecent images of his own unconscious daughter, who believes, despite his denials, that she too was drugged. She's campaigning against what she calls an epidemic of so-called date rape, drugging or chemical submission, alongside the MP Sandrine Josso. Josso's plans to roll out pharmacy test kits are driven by a personal experience right at the heart of government. Last year, she was given a glass of champagne containing ecstasy by a senator who'd invited her to his home to celebrate an election win.
I felt ill, nauseous, and I had palpitations too. I suddenly felt curious to see what he was doing because he took my drink and was in another room. So I watched him and I saw he had a packet in his hand and I realised he was drugging me. I left. I managed to escape and he followed me into the street.
She managed to climb into a taxi to Parliament, with a colleague helping her get out at the other end.
I was doing really badly because the senator had given me more than 3 times the recreational dose. The emergency services came here to Parliament. They put me on a stretcher and took me to a hospital specialised in toxicology. I asked if this happened often. The doctor and staff said we have several people coming in every day. And at that moment, I said to myself, OK, we have a public health problem.
Joël Guerriot has been charged with administering a substance to an individual without their knowledge in order to commit rape or sexual abuse. He denies this, his lawyer in the past saying it was a handling issue. He admits giving Sandrine the champagne but said he had no intention of assaulting her. We approached his legal team for a response, but didn't get one. This is a case that has inspired as much hope as horror, with Gisèle mobilising thousands, and not just here in France. Her story is far from over.
Emilia Jen reporting there. Now, as you heard, some people, including Gisele Pelicot's children, have condemned what they call the lenient prison term given to the men involved in the mass rape. The French lawyer and feminist Rachel Fleur-Pardo joins us now from Paris. Rachel, it's good to have you on the programme. Do you think that this trial could change French society, as Gisèle originally said it should when she dropped her anonymity?
Yes, absolutely. I think that this trial has already brought a lot to French society, and maybe also has brought a lot globally to the feminist battle and the fight against sexist and sexual violence. Why? It is because by her attitude, by her decisions to make this trial public, Gisele Pelicot helped to make shame change sides. And this is of very, very high importance when we know that very often it's because of shame that victims of sexual violence do not speak up and do not go to justice. So I strongly hope that there will be, and there might be one, and that there will be a Gisele Pelicot effect. It is to say that maybe women or men that have been suffering from sexual violence, and that maybe without Gisele Pelicot would not have reported these offences to the police, will now.
And yet we saw one of the male defense lawyers of one of the people who were, convicted, taunting the audience, taunting the protesters. I mean, it seems to be the tone was wrong, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I prefer to remember the other lawyers of this trial. I'm thinking especially about the amazing lawyers of Gisele Pelicot and also the lawyer of Dominique Pelicot. I think all of them have done an excellent job. But obviously, this trial was also the occasion to see how patriarchy is really still very much present in our society. When we heard some of the men accused of rape saying that, they thought that Gisele Pelicot was consenting to this because her husband had told them that they were allowed to have a sexual intercourse with her, it is very much clear that patriarchy is still very present. And if the fight against sexual violence is a legal judiciary battle, it is also a matter of culture. And I hope that as media in France and over the world have covered this trial, and I really, really hope that it will help us have a more bigger culture of equality.
But does the law need to be changed? Because, what we heard over and over again was the criticism that in order to prove a rape case, there has to be, violence, constraint, threat or surprise. And, in this case, especially, that just wasn't enough.
Yes, it was enough.
But will the law be changed?
No, it was enough. Like this case, especially proved that the French law is enough because actually there were 51 men accused of rape, and we have today 51 men that were eventually condemned of rape. So maybe the law will be changed. And personally, I do think that adding the word consent could maybe help making the law more clear, but it will not really be a magic wand against impunity. If we want to really reduce impunity and effectively fight sexual violence, we really have to help victims speak up and go to the justice and the police fast.
Finally, Rachel, is there a sense of shame in France that this reflects badly on French society? And also, is there a division in French society between how men and how women view this?
I have a feeling that society has been pretty much shocked as a whole. I've seen some of my male friends that were maybe not very sensitive to these topics being very much alerted and shocked by the Gisele Pelicot case. And I do think that it's not something that the French people or the French society should be ashamed of. We are right now at the heart of the global feminist battle against sexual violence, just like the United States, where like a few years ago with the Me Too movement, when it began in 2017. And really, I do believe that this trial will mark the history, the feminist history of the fight against sexual abuse. And I do think that it will change things both here in France and abroad.
Okay, Rachel Fleur-Pardo, thank you very much for your time. Thanks a lot.